Welcome everyone to Gloria C. Swain's Artist Talk for her sole exhibition, You Grow Through What You Go Through. My name is Claudia. I'm on the team at Band. I want to begin by acknowledging that the land we are on is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. As an organization dedicated to supporting Black artists and cultural workers, BAN acknowledges that we hold a unique space as allies with the Indigenous peoples of this land in their fight for human rights. We offer this land acknowledgement in solidarity with Indigenous peoples of Turtle Island and with deliberate intentions towards decolonization. We recognize that historical colonialism and ongoing colonialism has led to the present day situation where land acknowledgements are offered in place of land. As we gather in this virtual space, we recognize that we are connected with one another through servers taking up space on stolen land, and that various forms of dispossession continue to reproduce themselves today in racist and classist ways, including in connection to the digital divide. Today, we are hosting a conversation between Gloria C. Swain, the artist, and Shay Borden, the curator of this exhibition. This is the second solo exhibition Gloria has had with us. And although she creates in a variety of different mediums and photography, video, installation, and performance, it is her abstract work that we're showing at Band. Her first solo showing of her abstract work was actually at Band in 2019 after one of our co-founders, Karen Carter, asked to do a studio visit with her and was really drawn to her abstract pieces. So we're super excited to welcome her back, and you can see behind her several of her pieces. Gloria's solo exhibition, You Grow Through What You Go Through, is up now at Band until July 8th. This programming has been made possible by the support of Scotiabank. So thank you, big thank you to Scotiabank. We will slowly be reopening for timed entry visits. You can stay up to date on our reopening by following us on social media or by watching our website. For now, you can view the full exhibition online. I'll put all the links in the chat so you can see that there. And you can submit questions throughout this talk in the Q&A at the bottom of the screen, and Shay and Gloria will respond to them. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce you all to Shay, the curator, so we can get this conversation started. Shay is graduating from Connecticut College and was recently accepted into the Thomas J. Watson Fellowship, where she has been given a grant to work on her project regarding how Black women use art as a form of resilience throughout the world. She is graduating with an undergraduate degree in African Studies and Psychology. She was accepted into law school, and she is part of the Mellon Mays Undergraduate Fellowship as a scholar, researcher, and activist. With this grant, she'll be coming to work with us actually in Toronto at Band later this year. She's based in the States currently, but for now, we have had the opportunity to work with her virtually, and it's been a real pleasure. So I'm going to hand it over to Shay now to get talking with Gloria.
Thank you so much for that amazing introduction. Also, a little under the weather, so everybody please keep up with me. Thank you for allowing me to have this talk, and I'm here to introduce Gloria Swain, who has been in Toronto for over 30 years. She grew up in the South, so we're both state sisters. In living there, she really knew what it was like having anti-Black experiences of trauma, hurt, and really grew up with the understanding and the prowess really to navigate Black mental health, not just for Black men, but for all Black persons with varying identities, noting that we're in Pride Month. Very heavy celebrations there too. And yeah, so her work advocates not just for anti-Black racism, but for the intersections of race, gender, sexual orientation, and also age and status, as ageism is very prevalent in our respective societies. And yeah. Oh, also please visit the online exhibition page, according to Claudia. And without further ado, Gloria, how are you doing today?
I'm fine, thank you. So nice to see you again.
Oh, I know, so nice to see you. Yes, please everyone follow Gloria at the link below. So let's just get started. Gloria, first and foremost, when we look at some of your pieces and we understand sort of some of your some of the differences and sort of how with certain series and things like that, they play out differently. What are some of the pieces that you work on, in what order? Like, what's your inspiration for, if you have an order or if you don't?
Order. My art is like my life. I'm hyper, so I don't really have an order that I strictly go by. I don't work on a timeline or an order, not unless I'm doing like working on a piece for an exhibit or a commission piece. Otherwise, I take it as I go. I just grab a blank canvas. I choose my colors, the colors that inspire me at that moment, and I just create. So I don't really have a order that I go in.
Mm-hmm. Does that also mean that you probably like go back for some pieces, or you take longer to complete them, or does that mean like there's a different process for each particular piece?
Yes, yes and yes. For most of my work, it's like some of the it's different depending on what I'm working on or what I'm experiencing at the moment while I'm working on it. Some pieces can take a few hours, a few days. Some takes a few months, and some even takes a couple of years. Like I've been working on pieces now that I started in say 2016, and I'm still working on them. So those are like very personal pieces that I probably won't even show uh, because I'm like putting so much passion into it. Like what I'm experiencing, I revisit a lot of the things that I experienced and I apply that to the canvas.
Right. And how do you know, sort of, because you had said just now that, you know, some pieces might take a few hours, some might take a few months. When do you know a particular piece has reached its time to be shared, if it will be shared?
Yeah. That's hard to say because I approach each piece differently. As you can look at the titles of my work, so each piece represents an experience that something I'm going through. So I may just something that's light. I may go through it and okay, I'm over it. But some pieces may take a more time. Say, let me pick one of the pieces that I worked on. So mostly the stuff that I'm showing at Band today is fairly new, starting with 2020.
Mm.
And so just pick, say, the black, white, and gray.
Mm.
So those pieces, like as a continuation of the black, white, and gray series. But I created them because I knew I had a show to do. Okay, there's a piece there. It's called "Remember to Remember." So for that piece, what I was thinking about is the history, our history, and how it's important to remember it, to talk about it, to celebrate it, to share it, and to lift it up. So that piece there, it was done because okay, I said it was done. It's hard to explain when something's finished. Like I have pieces here that I've been working on for years. So, but only I would know when it's finished. I can feel it. It's hard to, it's like a baby. You know when the baby's ready to go, you know? It's hard to tell.
No, absolutely. And just going right off of this, and speaking of your Black, White, and Gray series, what was your frame of mind as you began looking at this particular series and the ones following? Because as individuals would note, if they go in person, there's different schemes to the different catalog of pieces. And so going off of perhaps like your mental space as you craft this particular piece, what were some things going through your mind? Like what was your aura? What was the way in which you were sitting as you choreographed, like, and made these pieces?
Well, I'm looking at my experience over 6 decades dealing with a lot of racism, a lot of Black trauma, and seeing what's happening in the world today. And it's like, even though we're going through a lot of I think Black violence against Black bodies, but we can't lose hope because with hope, there's possibilities. So this piece here represents that hope that we have as a Black community and the possibilities that are there for the future for the young people today who are also experiencing what I experienced as a young person.
Right. And so when you look at the particular inspirations of color in this series, the Black, White, and Gray series, what are some of the inspirations of using these colors, Black, White, and Gray?
Well, it goes with my very first painting was Black, White, and Gray. We looked at the white represents the colonization that it still exists, that still controls our blackness, right? So the black is the black pain that we continue to fight, and the gray is the oppression that comes from the colonization of the white supremacy against black bodies, right? And so even through that, this is called Black joy. Even through the struggles and what all the trauma that we go through, we still have that Black joy.
And it's actually very interesting because as someone who is familiar with these pieces, something that I actually forgot to even note or notice was sort of like the subversion, right, of what white means or what whiteness means as a color versus blackness.
Right.
And for some of these pieces, especially when you look at, where you're coming from as an artist, how the offsetting of white is blackness, but it's not necessarily the evil of blackness, as
Right.
we've been indoctrinated. So there's pieces of the system really embedded in your artwork and what it's framed as. And speaking of, your individual experiences in the greater area of Toronto, do you find pursuing this artwork difficult in that atmosphere?
Then the atmosphere in the U.S. or?
Yeah, then the atmosphere in the U.S. or in general, do you find it difficult in Toronto?
I find it very similar, but it may not be as large because Toronto is not as large as, just say Canada, put Canada versus the US. So I still see and face and experience some similar things that I faced in America growing up that I see in Canada itself, but it's not as widespread because it's not as big, it's not talked about. And it's hidden. I'm sorry, but Canada has polite racism. Seriously,
What might some of these people, I mean, just in case that, we don't have people from the US on here, what would we define polite racism as?
It's not in your face, it's behind your back. Like say, okay, let's just pinpoint a lot of the spaces, creative spaces that I walk into that are not welcoming. When I say not welcoming, I don't see people there who look like me. So I don't see work that look like my work.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Okay. And when you also because as we all know, people like to paint the United States as like this sole provocateur of issues of race. But, as Black persons, we all know that that is definitely not the case. Do you feel that there's an exclusivity that mirrors or differs from the United States? And by that, I sort of mean with putting your work in spaces, of course, not seeing yourself there, but trying to, put yourself in these spaces. Do you find it just as difficult or have certain hurdles in Toronto or comparatively with the US?
Well, I just want to say that I wish more spaces was like band. Welcoming. That band looks at the art and not the age, or not, they look at the talent, they look at the ability. And also another space is like, I just want to shout out to Tangled Art and Disability, that is also a welcoming space because of disabilities, mental disabilities, physical disabilities. So when I look at a lot of these spaces that don't welcome in people, who aren't considered, I just call them ableist spaces.
Right.
So there are some spaces that I go into that are outright racist. There are some spaces that are outright ageist. So a lot of spaces I stay away from. So I've created my own little space for me to do the work, hang the work, and if anyone's interested, I'm very happy to show my work.
Mm-hmm.
But I stopped fighting to get in spaces a long time ago. So
right, and I think folks probably won't know this, but in our one-on-one conversations, there was a particular quote that stuck with me, where you sort of say we're still enslaved. How
Yes.
is the art informed by sort of like that quote, like just elaborating on that, because that was one of the things that really stuck with me to this day. And not in the Kanye West sort of we're all slaves type of thing, but the type of discussion where it's just sort of like we're still indoctrinated within the white supremacist space. So going off that, could you just elaborate more on that, and also how that connects, some of the systemic issues with that connects with art?
Not just art, in society itself, we're still facing as as a Black community, as Black people, as Black artists, as Black activists, we're still facing racial inequalities. You look at the school systems, hospitals. So it's just a whole. It's like an umbrella that we're still facing. So some work has been done, yes, but there's still a lot of work to be done.
Right, and we all should be aware of that.
Yes. And I speak about it unapologetic because I've experienced it. So,
and both in the US and in Toronto, which might shock some people, but you know,
but you would think in Toronto it's different, but it isn't. To some certain extent, it might be a little worse to the fact that people don't talk about it. Like in the US, we know when something bad happens in the Black community because we talk about it. Here, it's not so much, but it's getting better.
Slowly but surely.
Yes.
I was about to say that we got to elaborate on that, making it worse, just because, you know, again, people love painting the US as the provocateur. But no, that's definitely not the case. And sort of bringing it back to your artwork, I want to look at the Blue series. And this sort of goes back to some of the questions that I was asking earlier about what are some pieces that, like, connecting color with some of the inspiration of how you sort of sit down and, you know, do these pieces. What are some pieces that you imagine being viewed together? And by that, I sort of mean, like, when we look at the Blue series, like Remember to Remember Others, like how is sort of like these pieces sectioned off and sort of like the meaning behind that as well?
Okay, for those, this is also a continuation of the Blue series that I started a couple of years ago, but this is all new pieces. And the titles ties in. My inspirational journey, along the way, and a burst of colors. So it's like I'm sharing my journey that I've experienced, that I'm experiencing today, but it's still a burst of colors is also a celebration that I'm still here, that we survive a lot of stuff that we experience. So for along the way, I made a little note. Along the way looks at remembering that things that we experience, we don't let them break us. And the other piece is the inspirational journey, as I want my story, my journey to inspire others, right? And the piece, A Burst of Colors, that's just a celebration of all the beautiful shades of Blackness. It's also how we need to come together and tell our stories and celebrate our history.
And I think sort of too, like, going for how, like, if we were to bring this up to the viewer themselves, you know, and sort of like look at this and sort of like look and try and analyze what the pieces mean, is there also something to be said about how, like, not just the titles and words visualize what is going to be said, but how sort of getting over or going through trauma, right? Because it's all about going through trauma looks different for different Black persons.
Yes. But I want the art itself to, like, speak to the people. It's like, I can't tell you what to feel when you look at my work, but if you see the title that my journey I'm telling my journey to inspire you. Hopefully it does inspire, but I want people to interpret my work the way that it makes them feel. I want the work to bring you in, make you think, and make you appreciate how far you got and how you got to where you are.
And that's actually something interesting, just because one thing that I had noticed, you know, viewing this particular pieces and sort of like seeing the lack of white spaces, how that sort of translated into what you just said about how it's just sort of like you're growing through this and you're looking back and sort of seeing how you've grown so much.
Yeah.
And with that being said, there's still aspects of Black, that you see that still represent who you are. But my question was just gonna be sort of, but it was sort of a question that you answered of where those white spaces went, where that issue of trauma and things like that went. But I think you explained it. It's sort of like you're growing through it, correct?
Yeah. But we still got that Black joy. You see the Black in the, you still got the Black joy. It was like, I take my Black joy wherever I go.
Exactly. And so in that sense, there's a not just physical movement, but an emotional movement throughout the piece as well, correct?
It's passion, it's rhythm.
Speaking of that passion and rhythm, there's something to be said about movement in itself. So when we look at some of the shapes of the pieces on top of the sort of gradual feel of emotions, there seems to be sort of like different directionalities and sort of like different sort of like placements that not just the viewer feels, but also the colors and sort of like the pigment and scheme, so to speak, to. Can you speak more on that as well?
That represents the issues that we go through different issues at different times, different phases in our lives, right? But we still move in different directions. We still have to move. You can't just set, because when you set and not address the issues that are impacting you, you keep it inside. You have to like let it free,
Right.
So that's the movement.
I also wanted to bring to everybody's attention that you yourself are a mover and shaker. I see you on TikTok, if they don't know, but a lot of what you do, even in your own life, has to do with the movement. And so in that aspect, would you say that there's something to positively contribute to movement as well, on top of, handling trauma?
For me, it's dance. It's about the music. For me, the dance and music is like art. It's healing. It makes you, when you're moving, you're like you're moving away from what you're going through. It's like you move through what you're going through. So it's like it's healing. It's refreshing. It makes you forget and remember. For me, I've always loved to dance. So the movement is just a reminder of that life feels good, even though you're experiencing something that is traumatizing, something's bad, something may be trying to hold you back. You shake that shit off. I'm sorry, y'all, but you shake it off and you move.
Oh, and speaking of which, on the same topic, someone asked the question, do you listen to music while you paint?
Yes and no. Depending on what I'm going through, so I say I'm going through something that is very, like, this week has been hard. So I've been painting all week, but I paint in silence because I need to clear my head, like I need to have I need to breathe. So with the music, if I got music, I'm gonna dance. So I need to sometimes just step back and like focus on what's up in here. And so sometimes I listen to music. I love Billie Holiday. I listen to Billie Holiday when I'm
Holiday too.
Oh yeah, when I'm remembering like some intergenerational trauma stuff that I'm trying. It's hard to forget something, so we have to learn to cope with it. So I cope with a lot of my past through my work, right? And so I listen to music, some jazz, blues.
And I actually wanted to, on that same question, I have another question just relating to how sort of, you were saying how you need to take a step back and sort of like get more into your head just so that you stay on focus with your work. Do you find that sometimes the way that, the world works, like whether there's news coming up, more Black pain, Black trauma, because we know that, media outlets love to circulate Black trauma as if it's a commodity. Do you find yourself also having to do the same thing when it comes to real world events, or stepping back from like constant dissemination of like Black trauma and Black pain?
Yeah, sometimes I just take time off from social media completely, and just I just try to find something positive. I go for a walk, and it's like, my thing is like, I would go. Nature is also healing. I live near the water, so when I need to like step back, I just walk along the water. I listen to the water. I smell the water. We as a descendant of someone who was stolen from our
I'm gonna say
land.
water is very significant.
Yes. So it's like I smell the water, and in the water there's a memory that I have no idea what it is, but it hits me it hits me inside, right?
Mm.
So I have a love-hate relationship with the water. Like, I love it, but I hate it because I know the history of it, and how, the I don't, it's hard to explain.
It's crazy because that was something that I think I was going to point towards in your work, especially the Blue series. When we look at aspects of your art, it definitely, and I think we talked about this before, the theme of water seemed to pop into my head when I was looking at it. And do you find that same love-hate relationship, those same emotions penetrate your work, especially like in the Blue series and even in the multicolored series, when you find other pieces of color infiltrating sort of the water?
Maybe I should reword that. Instead of hate, it's the pain. It's the pain of not knowing. It's the pain of remembering what I don't know that I remember. It's a pain of what I know happened.
Right.
Yeah. So I don't think it's hate. I think it's pain. And also for me, blue represents the ancestors, the sky. I'm not very religious, but I'm very spiritual. So yeah. No, Karen, I love the water. So maybe it's not the hate, it's the pain that the water brings to me. When I'm going across to the island, it's like I just hurt. So yeah.
Do you find that in some of your later pieces, like for example, like some of the multicolored pieces, I want to say maybe a celebration, as an example, do you still feel like that tinge of pain, even in something as celebratory as that piece that has the colors, that has like the growth from trauma? Do you feel that there's a lingering pain that's still there, or by the point of being there, do you feel that it's entirely removed of trauma, if that's possible?
No, we can never remove the trauma, but we learn to cope with it. So a celebration is not erasing, but remembering, but also celebrating those that came before us. And as an elder myself, it's like I have to learn to celebrate my history so that I can talk to the younger generation, because we need to learn to love ourselves, and our history is part of who we are today. So for me, every day is a celebration that I wake up. So
right. And with that being said, too, do you feel now changing the words out from celebration to like healing? Do you find that in terms of what to impart to the viewer, or in terms of what you're trying to communicate for the Black community, do you find that there's something about healing that doesn't necessarily speak to a right or wrong way?
well, no, everyone has their own way of healing, but for me personally, healing is a celebration. Because if I just sit back and remember what I experienced as a young child growing up, let me see. I think, okay, Maya Angelou. I know why the caged bird sings. Her story is so similar to what I went through. And so it's like, I know why she wrote that. It's like sometimes we have to like find ways to cope with our past, and that's the way we heal. So for me, healing is doing my art, and I get to celebrate. I get to look back and say, okay, I survived that. So if I can survive it, you can survive it.
Yeah, and going off of this, I think someone asked another question in relation to your subconscious connection to pain and ability to thrive in it despite our difficult history. Can you talk more about that on like a personal note of sort of how you're able to cope, and sort of where you think the subconscious connection comes in?
For me, that's hard to answer, because sometimes it's like I just shut down from the world. I take a few days, a week maybe, just to chill, because it's hard. Some things are hard to deal with. You see me smiling, but you don't see me when I close the door.
Right.
So as a people, we've always been taught to not show what we're going through. So for me to talk about my story, it takes a lot out of me. And sometimes I just have to like step back, and just reboot.
Yeah, and I think just doing a little, plug in as another African American too. And I think you were talking about this too, but the way that, the psychology really works, on the themes of trauma and on the themes of mental health, the sort of idea that you're not just going through trauma. Like this is like when you talk about the heavy generational trauma, there's an actual biological effect that sort of is embedded by us. And I don't want to take the words out of your mouth, but I remember you saying in one of our discussions that the inherited trauma is something that is very burdensome, and I think that many African Americans are born with, which may or may not relate to that subconscious connection that you were talking about earlier. But I don't know. Do you agree with that? Do you disagree?
I agree. Well, everyone is different, and they deal with trauma differently.
Right.
I've learned to deal with it through my art. There are also topics and things that I don't even revisit because it's too painful. So maybe one day I will be able to include it. Maybe I take it to my grave. So a lot of things, people deal with trauma differently. And the mental state is different. Everyone's different. So I may be able to deal with something whereas someone else my age cannot. So it's hard to talk about that.
Right. And I think something that you do very well is sort of, you're not really asking one person or another to interpret or understand or sort of like feel the same. But I think, and you can tell me if I'm right or wrong about this, but you want them to understand the feeling that you get when painting the picture.
Right.
Or the feeling that's behind sort of the method in which you create this art. So not necessarily understanding their trauma the exact same way, but understanding or trying to emulate that internal connection of how you are when you produce the piece. Correct?
Yeah. And I also want people to understand that it's important for them to tell their own story when they're ready. Because so many times it's like, okay, I'm an artist. I've been doing this for over 30 years. When I'm gone, my art's going to still be here. I don't want someone to say, oh, this. I'm telling it now. So you already know my story, right? So that's important to like tell your story while you can.
Exactly. Especially like in this society and culture where a lot of, your work might give you credit when you're dead and gone. A lot of
get it gone.
When you're here and you're present and you're able to give so much life now. And something which is a great segue to a particular piece that is heavy in my heart, the piece In Conclusion. There's something to be said about leaving a legacy behind. And what are some things that you want to leave behind?
Okay, I got a quote from Maya Angelou. I love Maya Angelou.
Maya Angelou's great.
My girl.
Okay.
She's from the South. My mission in life is not merely to survive, but to thrive, and to do so with some passion, some compassion, some humor, of course, and some style. So I ain't got no style, but I got dance. So I want people to remember that even though my story is hard to listen to for some people, you see me dance, you see me smile, you see that I survived. So in conclusion, I don't forget where I came from. I don't forget how I got here. But I want people to remember that even though she went through that,
Right.
she was still able to bring in that Black joy, to inspire. So that's what I want to be remembered as.
And with that beautiful legacy, I want to thank you again for speaking. I want everyone to know that Gloria Swain's artwork will be on Band Gallery as a part of one of the online exhibits. Please take a look. At the end of this, if there are no further questions, we will be doing a full slide to look at the full series and works. Oh, speaking of which, there's one last question, or one of the other questions.
Yeah, I'm single. No, go ahead.
Oh, that was another thing. She's single, just in case y'all want to shoot your shot. Looking at her. But someone actually brought up the fact that there's artwork behind you, and it seems like quite a departure from the Black and white work. What drew you to adding these colors?
I'm celebrating Pride, of course. This is joy. I'm using bright colors, and I'm experimenting with different medias. So this is like spray paint and acrylic paint, which I've never done before. And I just wanted to experiment with different stuff. So this is gonna be my new series that I'm working on. So
right. So we should be excited for some more work, shouldn't we?
Well, if they check out my Instagram account, there's t-shirts, there's I'm doing merchandise right now. So with these colors. So.
Yes. Also, yes, please visit the website, her Instagram. And if there are any further questions, I'll give another minute. Yes, these are the links. Please follow. But yeah, if there. Oh, someone brought up something else that I think you'd love to talk about. This goes back into the conversation of textures and sort of the movements and the layers. There's a discussion about geometric shapes that they would want you to talk about more, and sort of how you use geometric shapes.
Oh, and the layers?
Yes.
Well, for the layers represents that all the things that we don't, as a Black woman, there's not one thing that I experience. And they don't come one at a time. Sometimes it's like layered on top of layered that we have to deal with different issues. And with the geometric shapes, I always use triangles or squares. There has to be a corner to move out. I never use circles in my work because with a circle, like there's no way out. So I create work that, okay, there's a corner, you move around. Sometimes we have to like go through different hurdles to just get around, to navigate through different spaces and,
Right. And I think someone also brought up the fact that they see a lot of rectangular shapes as opposed to triangle shapes, and sort of like where that comes from. I took geometry in 8th grade, so I can't speak on that. But Gloria, if you have any insight.
There's more corners. With a triangle, there's 3 corners. There's with a rectangle, I got more ways to get out. I used to live in Brooklyn. And in Brooklyn, when you go into a club, if there's one door, you don't stay there. There always has to be a way out.
Right.
So I use that in my art. There always has to be more than one way out.
Right. As like a parallel, you're saying, with trauma and things like that. Sort of like not being caged in or boxed in, but
right.
Freedom to move.
That's the freedom. For me, the rectangle, triangles, they represent freedom.
Oh.
Hey.
Yeah, no, that's something else that we're getting into, because that's something that notably changes with certain pieces that sort of like juxtaposes like the topics of movement and things like that. You do tend to see, depending on the title, a difference in shapes.
Right.
My mind is blown. Okay. Well, I didn't actually get all that, but thank you.
Okay.
Someone has a question. Any tips for young up and coming abstract talents?
If you're Black, you keep doing it. I've been told so many times that this is not Black art. My response is, I'm a Black woman. This is my art. This is Black art. You create what makes you feel good about yourself. You don't let people tell you what you should do or what you should not do. You don't put yourself in anybody's box. I don't fit. There's not a box to fit me right now. So I think it's about the passion. Follow your passion. Follow your heart. Do what makes you happy. Do you, boo. So.
And speaking on that too, what do you mean that, you know, this isn't Black art? What is the archetype of Black art?
Well, people expect me to do like figurative stuff. I used to do that, but that's not it does nothing for me. With this work is about being free, being seen, being noticed, being in control. So for me, abstract art is Black art.
And do you find yourself, going back to the earlier discussion about how racism in Toronto basically exists, as well as racism in the art world, do you find that this sort of the decategorizing or sort of stripping away of the Black identity of your work sort of plays into the broader racism that you experience as a woman? Like the fact that your art doesn't go by the typical category that has allegories of trauma, do you feel that that has something to do with it?
To a certain extent. It's like a lot of galleries, they got 1 or 2 Black abstract artists, they're good. You don't need more than 1 or 2. And the fact that I'm older also, I get a lot when I talk about there's not a lot of older Black women artists in Toronto where you're here. I'm like, but I'm not the only one in Toronto. Like, where we at, you know? So, yeah.
All right, if there are any other questions, please send them away. Thank you again, Gloria. Like, we've had a few dynamic conversations, and
yes, we did.
Again, we would be talking for hours. No one here knows that, but we'd be having our own conversations. And you know, as someone who's an elder and sort of inspires me, there's definitely something to be said about not you being in a space, or you, as you love to say, I don't need a seat at your table. I can stand.
I can stand, you know? I don't need to sit down. My legs hurt, so we're good.
And with that beautiful, beautiful discussion and that amazing legacy and these great questions, we can finally wrap up the talk. Again, please check out the links below. And right after the discussion, we'll be having a brief slideshow of all of our work. Please check it out. Please open your purses. And thank you all again.